that I think that he sort of struck a common chord with his readership, and his readership could very much relate to that. Now, one of the things that maybe Wright did not do as well as some of the others, Ellison and maybe some of the other writers did, was to portray more than a sense of doom, but to go a little further than that, and portray a sense of accomplishment. Many of his books don't portray that side.
Unless white Americans pry their minds out of their horse and buggy ways of regarding Negroes, violence may be upon us, says Richard Wright, the same year the title is released. This depends upon the degree to which white Americans can purge their minds of the illusions that they own and know Negroes.
Wright's career is on the rise, and invitations to speak flow in from across the nation. He is now a spokesperson for an entire generation of African Americans. With the increased income from royalties, he looks into buying a home in Vermont. But when the owner discovers that Wright is African American, he refuses to sell. Later the next year, when Wright decides to move his family to the prosperous Greenwich Village section of New York City, he needs a white lawyer to front for him. But after moving in, the lawyer can't help fend off resentment from white neighbors who raise $20,000 and offer to buy his home. The small population of African Americans in Greenwich Village face a steady barrage of discrimination. Even shopping is risky. African Americans are often yanked out of stores by white gangs and beaten. Interracial couples are regularly attacked.
Blacks arrive at the cost of tireless work and many ups and downs. To arrive in their case means only that their value as a singer or musician has been recognized. Their existence as blacks has not changed. Their psychological suffering will last until they die. As for the material conditions of life in the large cities, they are ghettoized. It's a dog's life.
Finally, Wright decides to leave the United States.
When he was in New York, he was living in Brooklyn, and he had sought to buy or to rent an apartment in Manhattan. Searched all over, couldn't find anything. Sent his wife to seek an apartment, who was white. She found an apartment. When they went to get the apartment, and the landlord saw who he was, they denied them the apartment. Once again, this racism, this sense of denial that he had experienced all his life was even touching him in his days of success.
By May 1947, Wright and his family are living in France. He focuses most of his time on building closer ties with French and African intellectuals battling colonialism. In 1949, he begins a script for the film version of Native Son. This same year, his wife gives birth to a second daughter, Rachel.
I think he chose to live permanently in France because he was accepted. I guess that's the simplest way. He felt that he was accepted as a writer, he was accepted as a man, he was accepted as a human being, and he was able to enjoy himself. But you still couldn't take the soul away from the South.
Over the next 7 years, Wright publishes numerous books that continue to call for the end of racial oppression. The Outsider, released in 1953, focuses on the character Cross Damon, who is having an identity crisis brought on by a hostile white world, loving a white girl, and conflict with the Communist Party. This long-awaited book, Wright's first since Black Boy in 1945, is widely covered in the United States press. News reports are largely negative, and they claim Wright has lost touch with events in the United States since his exile. Still in exile in Europe, Wright's activities are now monitored by the FBI, the Central Intelligence Agency, the State Department, and the United States Information Service. He won't travel to the U.S. because he believes he'll have to testify before a Senate subcommittee for his alleged un-American involvement. During this period, many of Wright's books are out of print and he is having financial problems. He is also having marital troubles with Ellen, who is living in New York. Besides occasional visits from a few close friends at his farm in Normandy, he is alone most of the time. In 1960, a chronic intestinal illness flares up again. He visits a clinic for treatment, and while resting in a bed in the clinic, suffers a heart attack and dies on November 28th. Some suspect foul play, but no evidence is uncovered. Wright's body is cremated with a copy of Black Boy.
Most assuredly, he was one of the most dynamic writers of his time. He was very much a writer that was able to open the eyes of persons whose eyes had been closed to the true situation of African Americans during this time. That his perspective and his anger permeated the pages that he wrote and allowed his readership to very much absorb and vicariously experience what his words were saying, what kind of experiences he shared with his readership. So and he did it eloquently. He did it in simple words that they could understand. He did it in a way that everybody could relate to.